Hello and welcome. My guest today is no fan of any of the candidates running for US president. In fact, he thinks it's time to start a revolution. Jesse the Body Ventura, as he was popularly called, was one of the best known professional wrestlers in the United States. Well, after his wrestling career came to an end in the early 1990s, he embarked on a successful political career, serving as the governor of Minnesota for 4 years. And don't forget, we take your calls on the show. You can reach us at the numbers at the bottom of your screen. Well, Jesse Ventura joins me now from New York. In his latest book, Don't Start the Revolution Without Me, he says Americans are a nation of lemmings and that the only difference between the two major political parties and street gangs are that the politicians wear Brooks Brothers suits. He blasts the two-party dictatorship in America and reserves special judgment for the chicken hawks who he said marched the country into war in Iraq. Jesse Ventura, welcome to the show.
Great to be here today. Thank you.
Pleasure to have you with us. And I have to say, to some degree, you've left it hanging as to whether or not you might consider going into this presidential race as an independent. Can you relieve us of the mystery?
Well, there really isn't a mystery. At this late date, you know, the Democrats and Republicans, the two parties control the election. I would be required to get access, ballot access in all 50 states, which you wouldn't have time to accomplish that now in time for the elections and then to campaign. And of course, they probably would do everything they could not to allow me into any of the debates, because it's very rare that you see a third choice in any of our debates. Probably the last one was Ross Perot back in 1992.
You know, you managed to become governor of Minnesota with a very small campaign budget, and went on to become have the highest approval rating of any governor in the state. Now, I wonder, isn't that one of the problems with American politics, that even if you were to consider running for president, you just have to have such deep pockets?
Oh, without a doubt. You know, they've turned the whole business of elections into panhandling and bribery. You know, you got to go out and panhandle to the people and say, give me money so I can go do this job. And then if you return the favor for the money, well, then it's technically bribery. I would like to add, though, I wasn't just the governor of Minnesota. 8 years before that, I served as mayor of Brooklyn Park, Minnesota, which is the 6th largest city, from 1990 to 1994. Then I went back to the private sector for 4 years before I then ran for governor in '98.
Right, and very popular too. And I have to say, you know, in this book, you don't hold any punches back, and you're fairly lambasting. I mentioned some of the things in the open. You've lambasted a lot of things here in America. Now, what made you write the book at this stage? Why write it now?
Well, I wrote it because I think it's time for the people to wake up. I mean, these two parties now have the United States of America $9 trillion in debt. I can't even imagine what $9 trillion is. But, you know, most families, when you grow up and you're a parent, you work your whole life so that you can save up something so that when you die, you can leave something to your children. Well, all the people in America now that are saving up to leave something for their children, they better prepare, because their children, because of the national debt, are going to owe so much to the government that they're actually going to leave their inheritance to the government rather than their kids.
We had an email that came in from Australia, and our viewers obviously around the world, so there was an interesting point here made by S. Anoma in Sydney, who wrote in saying, Jesse Ventura is right to believe that changes can be brought about by nothing short of a revolution. How would he bring about this revolution? Is he going to follow the lead of South American nations such as Venezuela?
Well, you know, to me, a revolution doesn't necessarily have to be violent. Certainly there can be a violent revolution, but that's not what I'm advocating. I'm advocating a revolution at the ballot box, and here's what I would love to see happen. And I think it's in a few countries around the world. I would love to see on every ballot, be it local, state, or national, the choice of none of the above. And most people kind of chuckle at that, but really what it's saying is that I'm here to participate in the system. I'm voting, but I'm voting a vote of no confidence in the candidates you've brought forward to me. And I'm willing to bet that in some local, statewide, and national elections, you would actually see none of the above win. And I think if that would happen, it would get our media back on the stick of, instead of being just panderers to this two-party system, it would force them to look in other places and really force our government to open itself up for more ideas than the two.
Now, in criticizing the two-party system, you describe yourself as a libertarian with a small L. What exactly does that mean, and how would you fit in as a third-party candidate, say?
Well, Well, libertarian with a small L, I found out that the capital L libertarians are really anarchists. They don't believe there's any role for government at all. And I certainly believe there's a role for government. I just believe it should be far more limited than what it is. I'm fiscally conservative, but I'm socially liberal. So I can't fit into either of these parties. And I think truly I represent more of mainstream United States than the two parties do, because when I ran for governor of Minnesota, I occupied the center. And of course, the Democrats had to go to the far left to get their base. The Republicans go to the far right to get their base. As soon as they've achieved that, they have to beeline back to the center. Well, by the time they did that, they couldn't win the election in Minnesota because I already had the center occupied.
We have a call from Claire in Florida who'd like to ask something. Claire, go ahead.
Yes, good afternoon. My question to Mr. Ventura is, have you heard of Ron Paul? Since you were a libertarian, I'm assuming you have heard of Ron Paul. He is presently running for president with the Republican Party, although McCain have claimed to be the person representing the Republican Party, but there are actually two still running in the Republican
Okay, yeah, so
Party.
let's get Jesse Ventura's views on Ron Paul and where he stands.
No, first of all, Ron Paul has dropped out of the race. So Ron Paul is not running anymore, but he did tell everybody keep the revolution going. I'm very familiar with Ron Paul. I think he was probably the best candidate that I could find with those two parties that were running, but he is out of the race now. He said that he was. But Ron Paul actually had the best answer, I felt, when Bhutto was assassinated in Pakistan. They went to every candidate, and every candidate gave this long litany of what the United States should do and this and that and whatever. They got to Ron Paul, and he simply said, "Isn't that Pakistan's business?" And I firmly agreed with that. And so, you know, unfortunately, the media, I didn't feel, gave Ron Paul a real fair shake, you know, in the election. But certainly I would probably align myself mostly with him if he were still running. But the lady was wrong. He's not running anymore because he already officially dropped out.
Now, in your book, you
and
take...
John McCain did... Wait. John McCain doesn't claim to have the nomination of the Republican Party. He has it. He has enough delegates to be called the Republican nomination.
Looking at the home front here, Mr. Ventura, we've got a comment in your book where you were pretty critical of the Patriot Act, and it followed the attacks of, you know, the Patriot Act that followed the attacks of 9/11. Now, taking an excerpt from the book, you say, "The homes, offices, and phone records of Americans can now come under surveillance without a warrant. We can be spied on overseas. The Fourth Amendment is basically gutted," referring to that what protects Americans from seizures and searches. Now, how hard do you think it is to turn things around then? How hard do you believe it would be to be able to give back the kind of civil liberties and the sense of freedom that Americans feel they've lost in recent years?
Well, obviously some of them don't feel they've lost it because they voted for this thing. I think it's ridiculous. You know, when government starts telling you they're going to protect you, watch out, because that means they're going to take your freedoms from you. I would rather face the terrorists than lose my freedoms. You know, I was bold enough to say in the book, give me liberty or give me death. Once we give up those freedoms, they become very, very difficult to get back. And right now, we've got an assault on the Constitution, an assault on all our freedoms, and they're doing it in the case of telling us they're protecting us. Like now they've got this border fence they plan on building on the border between Mexico and the United States. Well, they now approved that they can violate over 30 existing laws to build this fence along the border. And do they really believe a fence is going to work? The greatest fence in the history of mankind is called the Great Wall of China. And it was penetrated, I believe, in 1644 by the Mongols. It didn't work. Now it's nothing but a tourist attraction. I would hope that if they do build this fence along the border, they make it tourist friendly, so there'll be something good to become of it. And when it's built, I'm going to climb it the opposite way in protest. I'm going out towards the Mexican side because I want people to wake up to the fact that a fence today, supposedly to keep people out, might be a fence to keep you in 10 years from now. And I personally don't want to live in East Berlin.
I want to ask you about your life, or I'll try to ask you about your life in Baja a little later, but let me get on to an email we got regarding America's role in Iraq, and this one came from Matthew in London. Matthew says, "We went to war in Vietnam under false pretenses. It turned out that US ships never came under fire in the Gulf of Tonkin. Decades later, we pulled yet another fast one with WMD. How credulous must we be as a nation to fall for it again?" And I wonder, you as a former Vietnam War veteran as well, how do you answer that email? How do you regard, or how would you deal with the situation in Iraq?
Well, first of all, I answer it with my term chicken hawks. We're being governed by the chicken hawks. These were all the people who were chicken in Vietnam. They ran and hid. President Bush, Dick Cheney with 5 deferments. Now, Bush was in the Air National Guard. Well, if you go back to my generation, we had the draft. So the Air National Guard never went overseas. They stayed right here where it was safe. And like I always like to say, President Bush was protecting the skies of Dallas from the North Vietnamese Air Force, of which they didn't have one. Well, the point being is that we were duped in Vietnam, and we were duped again into this war. And it just seems that we don't want to learn from history, but part of the reason we were duped is the fact that the very people running our country were not the ones that went to Vietnam, so they didn't learn the lesson.
We've got to take a short break, but I hope Ahmed in Nigeria can stand by to join us with his call after this very short break. Jesse Ventura, don't go away.